The tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the Montgomery estate marked another second of silence, as it had done for 5 years. A golden-haired girl breathed softly in the kitchen, without making a whisper. Emily had never spoken a word. Not Mama, not Papa, not even a babble. The best doctors from Johns Hopkins had failed. All the money in the world couldn't buy a single word from her lips. Until Mary Rose Rivers, the housekeeper everyone ignored, offered her a steaming cup of tea. "Drink this, little one," she whispered. Emily drank slowly. And moments later, a trembling voice would break 5 years of silence forever. If this story already touched your heart in the first seconds, subscribe. Here we tell stories that restore faith in human miracles. The Montgomery estate rose like a giant of marble and crystal in the Richmond Hills. Its windows reflected the morning sun like eyes that never blinked, watching a world that Richard Montgomery believed he could buy. But there was something his fortune had failed to acquire: the sound of his daughter's voice. On the 4th floor, behind French silk curtains, Emily awakened like every morning. At 5 years old, she was a girl with wheat-golden hair and green eyes that seemed to contain entire oceans. Her small hands moved gracefully as she drew in her notebook, creating colorful worlds where words weren't needed. Silence accompanied her like a faithful shadow. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence full of thoughts, emotions, everything her heart wanted to say, but her voice refused to pronounce. Richard Montgomery climbed the stairs with the urgency of a man who converts every second into gold coins. His Italian suit fit perfectly to his imposing figure, but his gray eyes held the coldness of someone who had forgotten how to love without calculating the price. "Emily," he said upon entering, checking his platinum watch. "Dr. Castellanos is coming this afternoon, another specialist from Boston." The girl looked up, smiled weakly, but there were no words. It was consultation number 37. Richard kept exact count, as he kept count of everything in his financial empire. Neurologists, psychologists, speech therapists, autism specialists, even a famous healer from India, all had failed before Emily's mystery. 3 floors below, Mary Rose Rivers began her first day of work. At 33 years old, she had hands weathered by years of service in others' homes, but her eyes retained a warmth that the hard years hadn't managed to steal. She came from the Blue Ridge Mountains, from a place where women learned ancient secrets from their grandmothers. Secrets about plants that calmed the soul, about infusions that opened the heart, about the simple magic of caring for others with true love. "Rose, remember," her grandmother had whispered years ago, "plants don't heal for what they are, but for the love with which you prepare them." The Montgomery kitchen was a temple of stainless steel and restaurant-grade appliances that cost more than Mary Rose's annual salary. But she moved naturally, as if every space became home under her careful hands. It was then that she saw her for the first time. Emily came down the service stairs like a golden ghost, barefoot, with her white cotton nightgown floating around her. She stopped at the kitchen threshold, observing this new woman with a curiosity that shone in her green eyes. "Hello, little one," Mary Rose whispered, without turning completely. She had felt her presence, as she always felt presences that needed care. Emily approached with dancer steps until she positioned herself next to Mary Rose. She watched her prepare breakfast with a concentration that the housekeeper had never seen in such a small child. "Are you hungry?" Mary Rose asked, crouching to Emily's height. There was no verbal response, but Emily nodded with a smile that illuminated her entire face. In that simple gesture, Mary Rose saw something all the specialists had overlooked. This child wasn't broken. She was complete, perfect, simply waiting. Mary Rose headed toward the pantry where she kept her small personal treasure, a worn cloth bag containing the herbs her grandmother had taught her to use. The modern Montgomery kitchen transformed under Mary Rose's hands into something warmer, more human. "My grandmother taught me that silence is also music," she murmured, while her expert fingers selected each herb. Chamomile for calm, fresh mint for clarity, a pinch of thyme for courage. But sometimes the most beautiful music needs to find its voice. The water began to boil with a soft murmur. Mary Rose prepared the tea with ritual movements, not from superstition, but from love. Each leaf was placed with intention. Each minute of infusion was measured with the heart more than with the clock. The aroma that began to fill the kitchen was like an invisible embrace, warm and comforting. "You're going to like this," she whispered, serving the golden liquid in a small cup with butterfly drawings. Emily took the cup with both hands, deeply inhaled the aroma that enveloped her like a blanket of security. It was as if all the care she had never received was concentrated in that small cup. She drank slowly, savoring not only the tea, but the love with which it had been prepared. "What's happening here?" Richard's voice cut through the moment like a knife. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, with a furrowed brow and eyes full of suspicion. "Mr. Montgomery?" Mary Rose stood quickly. "I just prepared tea for the child." "Emily can't drink anything that isn't approved by her doctors," Richard growled, advancing toward them. "What kind of employee are you that doesn't follow basic rules?" "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know." Richard snatched the cup from Emily's hands, who looked at him with eyes full of sadness. "This child has complex medical conditions that you can't understand." Emily, seeing the tears Mary Rose was trying to hide, felt something move in her chest. A different warmth, more intense than the tea. It was as if all the words she had kept for 5 years had finally found a reason to come out. She opened her small lips, breathed deeply. "Papa." The word floated in the air like a golden butterfly. The cup crashed against the marble floor. Richard remained paralyzed, with eyes wide as plates. Mary Rose brought both hands to her heart, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Papa," Emily repeated, this time clearer, stronger, and then, turning toward Mary Rose, "Thank you." The echo of those 2 words bounced on the kitchen walls like church bells. 5 years of silence had been broken in an instant, and the Montgomery family's world would never be the same. Richard knelt before his daughter, trembling. For the first time in years, tears ran freely down his cheeks. "Emily, my child, can you really speak?" "Yes, Papa," she responded, hugging him with the naturalness of someone who had never lost their love, only waited for the perfect moment to express it. But in Richard's eyes, while embracing his daughter, something more than paternal joy began to shine. A spark that Mary Rose immediately recognized, and that froze her blood. It was the look of a businessman who had just discovered a golden opportunity. What was in that tea that achieved the impossible? And what would Richard do with this discovery that would change their lives forever? The following days at the Montgomery estate were a miracle in slow motion. Richard canceled all his meetings, something his partners never imagined possible, and stayed home, observing fascinated how his daughter began to fill the silences with words that sounded like silver bells. "Mary Rose" was the 3rd word Emily said, and she did it while running toward the kitchen that same afternoon, with arms extended toward the woman who had opened her voice's floodgate. "Little one," Mary Rose whispered, caressing the golden hair of the child. "How do you feel?" "Happy," Emily responded, and that simple word resonated in the kitchen like celestial music. Richard watched from the doorway, with a mixture of emotion and something harder to define that began to grow in his chest like a dark seed. During the first 3 days, Richard was a different father. He arrived late to the office, left early, and for the first time in years, ate dinner at home. He sat next to Emily for hours, listening to each new word as if it were poetry. "Why weren't you talking before, my love?" he asked her one night while tucking her into bed. Emily thought with the seriousness of a small philosopher. "I had no reason," she responded with the brutal honesty of 5 years. "But Mary Rose made me feel safe." That answer remained engraved in Richard's heart like a firebrand. His daughter had lived 5 years without feeling safe enough to speak until a domestic employee offered her a cup of tea prepared with love. On the 4th day, Richard sought Mary Rose in the kitchen. It was early, and the house still slept in that peace before dawn. "Mary Rose," he said, with a softer tone than she had heard from him before. "I need to understand what happened." Mary Rose dried her hands on the apron, cautious. "I don't know, Mr. Montgomery. I just made her tea like my grandmother taught me." "Your grandmother?" "Yes," Mary Rose smiled with nostalgia. "She was a healer in my region. She knew about plants, infusions. She said every herb has a purpose, and love is the most important ingredient." Richard approached with eyes shining with interest. "What herbs did you use exactly?" Mary Rose hesitated. Something in Richard's gaze intensity made her nervous, but her gratitude for what had happened with Emily made her speak. "Chamomile, mint, thyme, but also licorice, valerian, and a bit of passion flower. My grandmother said that combination calmed fear and gave courage to express the soul." Richard took mental notes of every word. "And does it work with other children?" "I don't know, sir. I had never tried it. With Emily, it was instinct." Richard nodded slowly, but Mary Rose noticed his eyes no longer looked at her, but through her toward something only he could see. Emily's vocabulary grew like a garden in spring. "Good morning. I'm hungry. Can I help? I love you." Each new phrase was celebrated by Mary Rose and Richard as if it were the first step on the moon. The child had become Mary Rose's constant shadow. She followed her throughout the house, asking about everything, telling hurried stories of 5 years of silence that finally found their voice. "Mary Rose," she told her one afternoon while they prepared cookies. "When I couldn't talk, I talked to you here inside," she pointed to her heart, "and I knew you would listen to me." Mary Rose was moved to tears. "I always listened to you, little one, always." But while Emily and Mary Rose built a friendship that healed old wounds, Richard began making calls. First to laboratories specialized in natural products, then to pharmaceutical companies, after that to experts in miracle product marketing. "I need you to research a formula," he said in each call, with a low voice and eyes shining with money fever. "Something that could revolutionize the treatment of language disorders in children." A week after Emily's first papa, Richard summoned Mary Rose to his office. It was an intimidating space, with dark wood walls and shelves full of books he had never read, trophies from companies he had absorbed, and photographs with politicians he had bought. "Mary Rose, sit down," he said, pointing to a chair in front of his mahogany desk. "I want to make you a proposal." Mary Rose sat on the edge of the chair, with hands intertwined on her lap. "I've been thinking about what happened with Emily," Richard began, with the controlled voice of someone who has rehearsed a speech. "What you did is extraordinary, revolutionary. Sir, I only—" "Let me finish," he interrupted, raising a hand. "There are millions of families in the world who suffer what we suffered. Children who can't communicate, desperate parents, specialists who charge fortunes without results." Richard stood and began walking around the desk, like a predator circling its prey. "Your tea, that formula you know, could change the world, and make us very rich in the process." "I don't understand, sir." "I want you to teach me exactly how you prepare that tea. Every herb, every amount, every step. We'll register the formula, create a company, commercialize it. We'll be partners." Mary Rose felt the air thicken around her. The word partners sounded strange in the mouth of a man who had never seen employees as equals. "Mr. Montgomery, I don't know if that's right." "Right?" Richard stopped in front of her with burning eyes. "Mary Rose, we're talking about helping thousands of children, about giving hope to families who have lost all faith. How can that be wrong?" "It's just that My grandmother always said these knowledges aren't sold. They're given away, shared, but never commercialized. Richard's smile hardened slightly. Your grandmother lived in another time, Mary Rose. In this world, if something isn't commercialized, it's lost, forgotten. Do you want the knowledge that saved my daughter to die with you? Mary Rose remained silent, feeling the weight of the words and the pressure of Richard's gaze. Think about it, he said finally, returning to his chair. You could stop being a domestic employee forever. Have your own house, your own life. All you have to do is share what you already know. That night, Mary Rose didn't sleep. She stayed in her small service room, looking through the window at Richmond's lights that twinkled in the distance like fallen stars. In her mind resonated her grandmother's words, "Sacred knowledge is shared with love, never sold for gold." But she also thought about Emily, about her smile, about the words that now flowed from her lips like spring water. Didn't other children deserve the same opportunity? At dawn, Mary Rose had made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. She knocked on Richard's office door. "I accept," she said simply, "but with one condition. That part of the profits go to families who can't pay for treatment." Richard smiled, but it was the smile of a shark that has smelled blood in the water. "Of course, Mary Rose, of course." But Richard had lied. And soon, Mary Rose would discover she had made the biggest mistake of her life. During the following 2 weeks, Richard transformed into the most dedicated student Mary Rose had ever had. He followed her around the kitchen with a leather notebook, noting every detail with the meticulousness of a scientist. He weighed the herbs on digital scales, timed the infusion periods, recorded the exact water temperature. "How many exact grams of chamomile?" he asked, with eyes fixed on the scale. "It's not about grams, sir," Mary Rose responded with infinite patience. "It's about feeling. My grandmother said plants speak if you know how to listen to them." "But there must be an exact measure," Richard insisted, frustrated. "Something that can be replicated, industrialized." Mary Rose looked at him with growing sadness. Each day he resembled less the emotional father who had hugged Emily, and more the cold businessman he had always been. Emily, meanwhile, flourished like a flower after rain. Her conversations became longer, deeper. She told invented stories, asked questions about everything she saw, laughed with music that filled every corner of the mansion. "Mary Rose," she told her one morning while they breakfasted together, "why does Papa write so much when you prepare my tea?" Mary Rose felt a knot in her stomach. Maybe he wants to learn to make it himself. "Yes, but are you going to leave?" The question hit Mary Rose like a punch in the chest. "I don't know, little one." "Don't leave," Emily whispered, taking Mary Rose's hand in hers. "With you, the prettiest words come out of me." That afternoon, Richard called her again to his office. This time, there were papers scattered on the desk and an open laptop showing market graphs. "Mary Rose, we've made great progress," he said, with the contained emotion of someone about to close the deal of their life. "My contacts at the laboratory have analyzed the tea samples. They think they can replicate the exact formula." "Replicate?" "Yes. Make machines produce the same result as your hands. It's the future, Mary Rose. The only way for this to reach millions of children." Mary Rose shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "But, sir, I thought we were going to do this together. As partners." Richard looked at her with an expression Mary Rose couldn't interpret. "Of course we're partners. But for that, I need you to give me the complete recipe, with all the exact amounts, all the steps, all the secrets your grandmother taught you. I already told you everything I knew." "Mary Rose." Richard leaned forward with eyes shining in a way that made her nervous. "I know there's more. The tea you give Emily every morning is different from what we prepare together in these experiments. More potent. More effective." Mary Rose felt the air escape from her lungs. It was true. She had been keeping the last secret, the most important one, the one her grandmother had made her swear she would only share with someone of absolute trust. "My grandmother taught me there's a final ingredient," she said finally, with barely audible voice. "But she made me promise I would never use it to earn money." "What ingredient?" Mary Rose closed her eyes, feeling she was betraying the memory of the woman she had loved most in the world. "Wildflower honey from bees that feed on Blue Ridge Mountain lavender during full moon nights. My grandmother said that honey carries the essence of freedom." Richard wrote feverishly, with accelerated breathing. "Where do you get that honey?" "There's a beekeeper in my region, Mr. Augustus. He's the only one who knows when the bees have been on the right lavender." "Perfect." Richard closed the notebook with a sharp blow. "I'll send someone to buy it from him." "Sir?" Mary Rose stood, suddenly feeling dizzy. "Can we start slowly? Try first with few families before—" "Mary Rose." Richard also stood, rounding the desk to stand in front of her. "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." The next day, a suited man appeared in Mary Rose's region with a suitcase full of money. Mr. Augustus, the beekeeper, sold his entire special honey reserve without asking questions. A week later, Richard summoned Mary Rose for the last time to his office. "Mary Rose," he said, without inviting her to sit, "I've been thinking a lot about our partnership." "Yes, sir." "The problem is that legally, it's very complicated to make someone a partner who doesn't have formal education, who doesn't understand the technical aspects of business." Mary Rose felt the ground move under her feet. "But don't worry," Richard continued, opening a manila envelope. "I've decided to compensate you generously for your contribution." From the envelope came a check. Mary Rose looked at the amount and felt dizzy. $100,000, Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's more money than you'd earn in your entire life as a domestic employee." "But what about the partnership? And helping poor families?" "Mary Rose, this is better. With this money, you can help whoever you want. You can buy a house, travel, live without worries." Mary Rose looked at the check as if it were a poisonous snake. "And my job here? It won't be necessary anymore." Richard returned to his chair as if the conversation had ended. "My secretary will help you with the resignation papers." "And Emily?" For the first time, Richard hesitated. "Emily will be fine. She can already speak. She doesn't need you anymore." At that moment, as if summoned by the mention of her name, Emily appeared in the office doorway. She had been listening from the hallway, and her green eyes were full of tears. "Mary Rose!" She ran toward her, hugging her with desperation. "Is it true you're leaving?" Mary Rose looked at Richard over the child's head. In his eyes there was a mixture of shame and determination that told her everything she needed to know. "Yes, little one," she whispered, feeling her heart break. "But I'll never forget you." "Don't go," Emily screamed. "Without you, I can't speak beautifully." "Of course you can." Mary Rose knelt to her height, fighting against tears. "You have the most beautiful voice in the world. You just needed someone to help you find it." She handed Emily a folded paper. "When you feel sad, read this. It's a secret between you and me." Richard watched the scene with tight lips, drumming his fingers on the desk. Mary Rose took the check, not because she wanted it, but because she understood she had no other choice. "Mr. Montgomery," she said finally with a dignity that made him feel small, "I hope this money is worth more than your daughter's trust." And she left, carrying a small suitcase and a broken heart. That same night, Richard gathered a team of the best publicists, chemists, and businessmen in the country. "Gentlemen," he said, with eyes shining with ambition, "I present Voice Tea, the product that will revolutionize childhood language disorder treatment." On the screen appeared Emily's image before and after drinking the tea. "In 2 months, this will be in every pharmacy in America." While Richard planned his empire, Emily cried in her room, reading over and over the paper Mary Rose had left her. "Little star, your voice is a gift no one can take away. Always speak with your heart, always tell the truth, and remember the most powerful words are those that heal, not those that hurt. I love you. Mary Rose. But Richard didn't know that Mary Rose, in her wisdom, had given him an incomplete recipe. And soon, the entire world would discover his deception. 2 months later, Voice Tea launched to market with the most aggressive advertising campaign America had seen in years. The ads appeared on television every hour. Mute children drinking the tea and beginning to speak, families crying with joy, desperate parents finally finding hope. The slogan, "The miracle your child needs," appeared on billboards throughout the country. Richard had invested half his fortune in the campaign, but he was sure he would recover it multiplied by 100. Emily's story had become the center of the advertising narrative. Videos of the child speaking, telling how the tea had changed her life. Testimonials from Richard as a grateful father. Everything carefully edited to maximize emotional impact. "Papa," Emily told him one afternoon, watching one of the commercials on television, "why is my face everywhere?" "Because you're special, my love," Richard responded without taking his eyes off the sales reports on his tablet. "You're helping other children. But will Mary Rose receive money too? She was the one who helped me." Richard felt a pang of guilt he quickly stifled. "Mary Rose already received her payment, sweetheart. Don't worry about that." The first weeks were an overwhelming success. Pharmacies couldn't keep up with demand. Children's hospitals reported waiting lists of months to get the product. Richard appeared in business magazines as Businessman of the Year and the visionary who revolutionized children's medicine. But then the first complaints began to arrive. "The tea doesn't work," desperate parents said. "My child has been drinking it for 2 months and still doesn't speak. It's a scam," they wrote on social media. "They've only stolen our money and hope." At first, Richard and his marketing team handled the criticism as isolated cases and unrealistic expectations. They hired internet trolls to attack those who complained, accusing them of not following instructions correctly. But as weeks passed, the complaints multiplied like a fire in dry summer. There wasn't a single documented case of a child who had started speaking after drinking Voice Tea. Not one. Independent laboratories began analyzing the product. What they found was a mixture of common herbs with no special properties beyond being a relaxing tea. The famous wildflower honey from Blue Ridge Mountain bees turned out to be common commercial honey with lavender flavoring. Health authorities initiated an investigation. Lawsuits began raining on Richard like hail in a storm. The press, which had elevated him as a hero, now crucified him as a villain. "The millionaire who scammed desperate families" headlined the newspapers. "The lie behind the Richmond miracle," wrote investigative magazines. One night, while Richard locked himself in his office trying to control the disaster, Emily entered without knocking. She had Mary Rose's paper crumpled in her hand and red eyes from crying so much. "Papa," she said with a voice that trembled like a leaf in the wind, "why do people say you lied?" Richard looked up from his computer, where he had just read notification of another millionaire lawsuit. "Emily, adults sometimes don't understand complicated things. But Mary Rose told me to always tell the truth," the child interrupted him. "And you said Mary Rose was wrong. Mary Rose is just a domestic employee, my love. She doesn't understand business." Emily looked at him with an intensity that made him feel naked. "Did you steal Mary Rose's tea, Papa?" The question fell on Richard like a hammer. For an interminable moment, father and daughter looked at each other in silence. In Emily's green eyes, Richard saw the reflection of the man he had become. "It's complicated, Emily." "No," the child said with a firmness that surprised him. "It's not complicated. Mary Rose taught me that stealing is wrong, that lying is wrong." Richard felt something break inside his chest. "If you stole from Mary Rose and lied to all those families," Emily continued with tears rolling down her cheeks, "then I can't call you Papa." "Emily, please." Mary Rose told me the most powerful words are those that heal, not those that hurt. Your words hurt many families. The child turned around and left the office, leaving Richard alone with the echo of his own betrayal. The following days were hell. Richard's company stocks plummeted. His partners withdrew support. Banks began collecting loans he had taken to finance the advertising campaign. In 1 week, Richard Montgomery went from being one of America's richest men to being on the brink of bankruptcy. But the economic loss was nothing compared to his daughter's silence. Emily had stopped talking to him. Not as punishment, but because, as she explained to the nanny Richard had hired, words are very important, and I don't want to waste them on someone who uses them to hurt. Richard tried everything. He bought her expensive toys she rejected. He organized parties she ignored. He hired clowns and magicians who performed for an audience of one child, who looked at them with sadness instead of joy. One night, desperate, Richard went to Emily's room. "My love," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed, "Papa made mistakes, but I did everything thinking about helping other children like you." Emily looked at him from her pillow, with the serious eyes of someone who has seen too much for their age. "Did you help Mary Rose when you threw her out of the house?" she asked. "I gave her money. Did you tell her you loved her? Did you thank her for healing me?" Richard couldn't answer. "Mary Rose told me good people do good things and bad people do bad things," Emily continued. "What kind of person are you, Papa?" That question remained stuck in Richard's heart like a poisonous thorn. The next day, the news reported that authorities had ordered Voice Tea withdrawn from the market, and that Richard Montgomery faced charges for fraud and false advertising. That same afternoon, while Richard packed important documents before the marshals arrived, the estate doorbell rang. He opened the door and found himself face to face with Mary Rose Rivers. She looked exactly the same as the day she had left, the same apron, the same sad smile, the same careful hands. But in her eyes there was something new, a deep wisdom, as if she had seen the end of the story from the beginning. "Hello, Richard," she said simply. "Mary Rose?" Richard felt his voice break. "What? What are you doing here?" "I came to see Emily and to talk to you. If you're here for the money, I can explain." "I'm not here for money." Mary Rose entered the house as if she had never left. "I'm here because a child needs me, and because a lost man does too." Richard closed the door and followed her, feeling for the first time in years like the child he had been before money stole his soul. What secret did Mary Rose keep that could change everything? And would Richard be willing to face the truth he had been avoiding? Emily ran down the stairs when she heard Mary Rose's voice in the vestibule. Her small, bare feet resonated on the marble like music after months of silence. "Mary Rose!" she screamed, launching herself into the arms of the woman who had been her salvation. "I knew you were going to come back." "Hello, my little star," Mary Rose whispered, hugging her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Have you been well?" "No," Emily responded with the brutal honesty of 5 years. "Papa became bad, and I don't know if I want to talk if words are used to hurt." Richard watched the scene from the stairs, feeling each word from his daughter like a stab in the chest. "Words are never bad, little one," Mary Rose said, caressing Emily's golden hair. "People choose how to use them, and you always choose well. But why did Papa choose badly?" Mary Rose looked up toward Richard, who was slowly coming down the steps like a man walking toward his own execution. "Sometimes adults get lost," Mary Rose said without taking her eyes off Richard. "We forget what's important and start chasing things that shine but don't warm the heart." "Like money?" "Like money." Richard reached the bottom of the stairs and stood in front of them, feeling smaller than his 5-year-old daughter. "Mary Rose," he said with a hoarse voice, "I came to apologize." "To me?" Mary Rose stood slowly. "I'm not the one who most needs your apologies." "Then to whom?" Mary Rose pointed to Emily, who was looking at them with the intensity of someone who knows they're witnessing something important. "To her. and to all the families who trusted you. But I stole your knowledge, threw you out of the house, betrayed you. Yes, Mary Rose said simply. You did all that. Richard waited for her to continue, to scream at him, to curse him. But Mary Rose only looked at him with a tranquility that disconcerted him. Aren't you angry? I was angry, Mary Rose admitted, for many nights, but anger is like poison. It hurts more the one who keeps it than the one who deserves it. So you forgive me? Mary Rose sighed deeply. Richard, I forgave you the day I left this house. But that doesn't mean what you did was right. And it doesn't mean you don't have to repair the damage. How? I've lost everything. My company, my money, my reputation, and most importantly, he looked at Emily, my daughter's respect. Have you lost everything? Mary Rose tilted her head. Or have you lost only the things that don't matter? Richard frowned, not understanding. You still have health. You still have this house. You still have a daughter who loves you, even though she's disappointed. And you still have the opportunity to do the right thing. But it's too late. People hate me. The tea doesn't work. I'm a fraud. Mary Rose smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Who said the tea doesn't work? Richard looked at her as if she had spoken in another language. Everyone says so. Laboratories analyzed it. There's nothing special in that mixture. Of course not. Mary Rose laughed softly. The recipe I gave you was false. The world stopped. Richard felt the air escape from his lungs. What? The real recipe has ingredients I never told you, and a process I never taught you. But why? Mary Rose looked at Emily, who was following the conversation with fascination. Because my grandmother taught me to know people, and from the first day I knew what kind of man you were. I knew you were going to try to steal my knowledge. Richard felt dizzy. So, all this time you knew that you were going to betray me. Yes, and even so you gave me a recipe? I gave you what you needed to show yourself who you really were, and to protect the true knowledge from people like you. Richard collapsed in a chair with his head in his hands. So all this was a lesson? No, Mary Rose said firmly. All this was your choice. I didn't force you to lie. I didn't force you to scam those families. I didn't force you to throw out the employee who cured your daughter. But the real recipe exists. Of course it exists. Richard looked up with eyes shining with new hope. Would you give it to me? It depends. On what? Mary Rose approached him with Emily holding her hand. On whether you're willing to use it the right way. How? The real recipe is a gift. It's not sold. It's given free to whoever needs it. No profits, no companies, no commercials. Richard felt something stir in his chest. But how am I going to pay the lawsuits? How am I going to recover my company? You're not going to recover your company, Mary Rose said gently. You're going to create something new, something better. I don't understand. Mary Rose knelt in front of him, putting her hands on his. Richard, what do you feel when you see your daughter happy? It's the most beautiful thing in the world. Is that feeling worth money? No. It's invaluable. Exactly. Now imagine giving that same feeling to thousands of families without charging a penny, just for the joy of knowing you helped. Richard closed his eyes, imagining for the first time in years something that had nothing to do with profits. But how am I going to live? Do you need a 20-room mansion to be happy? Mary Rose asked. Do you need 10 cars to feel valuable? Richard looked around at the immense house that had always felt cold and empty. No, he admitted. I was never happy here. Then sell it. Use that money to pay the lawsuits and start over. And after that you work, like any normal person. And in your free time, you prepare the real tea and give it free to whoever needs it. Richard felt something break inside him. But it wasn't something bad breaking. It was something hard and cold that had been imprisoning his heart for years. And would you help me? If you really change. If you really become the man your daughter needs you to be. Richard looked at Emily, who had been listening to everything with wide eyes. "My love," he told her, kneeling to her height. "Papa made mistakes. Many. Would you give me another chance to be the papa you deserve?" Emily studied him with the seriousness of a small judge. "Are you going to be like Mary Rose? Are you going to help without asking for money?" "Yes." "Are you going to always tell the truth?" "Yes." "Are you going to apologize to all the families you hurt?" Richard felt his voice breaking. "Yes, my love. To all of them." Emily looked at him one more moment. Then she extended her small arms and hugged him. "Then yes, you can be my papa again." And for the first time in months, Richard cried. He cried for everything he had lost, for everything he had hurt. But above all, he cried with gratitude for the opportunity to start over. Mary Rose watched them with tears in her eyes, knowing she had witnessed the birth of a new man. But the real test was just beginning. Would Richard have the strength to keep his promises and become the hero the world needed? 6 months later, Richard lived in a small 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Richmond. He no longer had a mansion or company, but he had something he had never had: peace. Mary Rose had agreed to help him, not as an employee, but as a partner in a mission that transcended money. Every morning they prepared the real tea, the one Mary Rose had kept as treasure her entire life. The true recipe required time, exactly 17 minutes of infusion, thinking only of the person who would drink it. "It's not magic," Mary Rose had explained. "It's complete attention. It's pure love." Richard learned to empty his mind of everything except the image of the child who would receive his tea. And it worked. The first case was Carmen, a 4-year-old girl whose family couldn't afford specialists. 3 days after drinking the tea, she said her first word: "Mama." The news spread by word of mouth. Soon, families from all over the country were coming to his small house. Richard received them all with the same humility, without charging a penny. "Why don't you charge?" journalists asked him. "Because love isn't sold," Richard responded. "It's given away." In 6 months, more than 200 children had begun to speak. But Richard didn't keep statistics or take photographs. He simply served tea and watched families leave with fulfilled hope. One morning, the director of America's largest pharmaceutical company arrived with her grandson, Miguel, who couldn't speak. A week after the tea, the boy said his first word: "Grandma." The director returned with the directors of the 5 largest pharmaceutical companies in America, offering him millions to distribute the tea worldwide. "No," Richard said simply. "The world is changed one family at a time, one child at a time, one cup of tea at a time." A year later, Richard received an invitation from the American Academy of Pediatrics to tell his story. In front of 2,000 doctors in Nashville, Richard took the stage without a prepared presentation. He only had his story. "My name is Richard Montgomery," he began. "2 years ago, I was a millionaire. Today, I'm a man who makes tea in his kitchen, and I've never been richer." He told them the whole truth: how he had stolen the recipe, how he had scammed desperate families, how he had lost his own daughter's respect. "But that extraordinary woman came back to teach me that true wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in lives touched by love." Mary Rose took the stage with Emily. "Doctors," Mary Rose said, "my grandmother taught me that plants don't heal for what they are, but for the love with which they're prepared. Complete attention is the first medicine." Emily took the microphone without fear in front of the 2,000 adults. "When Mary Rose gave me the first tea, it wasn't just the tea that healed me. It was that for the first time someone looked at me as if I were perfect just as I was." The auditorium kept absolute silence. "Doctors," Richard concluded, "I didn't come to ask you to abandon medicine. I came to remind you that the most powerful medicine is in human connection. It's in love." The 2,000 doctors stood up, applauding not only them but the awakening of something they had forgotten: the reason they had decided to heal. 3 years later, Richard found Emily reading in the garden of his small house. "What are you reading, my star?" A letter from a girl in Argentina who can already speak thanks to the centers that were inspired by us. Richard sat next to her under the tree they had planted. "Do you know what the most beautiful part is?" he asked. "That girl will never know the Richard I was before. She'll only know the papa you taught me to be." "Papa, do you miss being a millionaire?" Richard looked toward the house where Mary Rose prepared dinner, toward the garden full of medicinal herbs. "No, my love. That man had money. But this man has something much better, a daughter who loves him, a friend who saved him, and the opportunity to do something good every day." That night, while tucking Emily into bed, Richard reflected on his transformation. He had begun as a millionaire who believed money could buy everything. He had fallen when greed led him to betray the one who had helped him most. And he had been reborn as a man who understood that true wealth isn't counted in bank accounts, but in lives touched by love. "Papa," Emily whispered, "do you know what's the most beautiful word in the world?" "What, my star?" "Thank you." And with that word, the same one she had pronounced after drinking Mary Rose's first tea, Emily fell asleep. Richard smiled with the tranquility of someone who had finally learned the difference between having success and being successful. The next day, like every day, he would wake before dawn. He would prepare tea with Mary Rose for the families who would come seeking hope. And he would continue discovering that true magic wasn't in the herbs, but in the willingness to see each person as worthy of love. Because in the end, the most powerful words aren't the ones that are sold, but the ones that are given away. And the echo of those words can resonate for generations, healing wounds that neither money nor science had managed to touch. This story reminds us that transformation is possible for anyone willing to change, that true love isn't bought, it's cultivated, and that sometimes the greatest miracles are born from the simplest gestures. If this story touched your heart, share it. Because in a world full of noise, we need more stories that remind us of the beauty of human kindness. Subscribe for more stories that heal, inspire, and restore our faith that we can all be better than we were yesterday.